Rachel Maddow's incredibly dishonest reporting.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Codispoti from the Great Vocal Majority podcast and YouTube channel. And today I want to bring you what I am calling Rachel Maddow's incredibly dishonest reporting. Because Rachel Maddow, whether you want to believe her or not, I don't care if she's a Rhodes Scholar, I don't care what road she's been on, she is a liar. And she's done some very serious journalistic malpractice, and I want to show you a piece of that happened last night. That would be Thursday, April 20th, 2017, with some reporting she did. I say reporting euphemistically, about the Trump inauguration monies. So here we go. I'll be stopping this and interrupting from time to time just to point out where the lies and misleading statements are.
On last night's show, we closed out the hour with a question. We raised a question about $107 million that appears to be sloshing around right now somewhere inside the Trump administration, with nobody accounting for it.
Now, I wanted to stop it there because she said several things, all of which are untrue. She said there's $107 million of money sloshing around and no one accounting for it in the Trump administration. What she's referring to is $107 million that was raised by the Inaugural Committee for Donald Trump to fund events during the inauguration. Some of that money was spent, so it's not all $107 million, but more than that, she's saying the money is sloshing around. I don't even know what that means, but it's a very imprecise term, to say the least, certainly not a journalistic term. And she says no one accounting for it, but that's flatly false, because the Trump Inaugural Committee is required to file an FEC report, Federal Election Commission report, about what the disposition of that $107 million is. So, and not to mention that the Trump Inaugural Committee is not part of the Trump administration. The Trump administration refers to the government. The Trump Inaugural Committee is apart from the government. So it's not the same thing. It's like saying the presidential campaign is the presidential administration. No, it's not. So she's leading off with a barrage of misstatements. Let's continue.
These images here, these are images from the biggest presidential inauguration we ever had as a country. This was the first Obama inauguration in 2009. It was immense, biggest ever inauguration, biggest ever event of any kind in the city of Washington, D.C. To pull off that inauguration, the Obama Inaugural Committee raised more money than had ever been raised before for an inauguration. They raised tens of millions of dollars. They raised $53 million just for the inauguration. That broke all previous records for inauguration fundraising. And it broke those records by a lot. But
this is another misstatement. She's trying to say that the Obama inaugural in 2009 raised more money by far. That's not true. If you go to factcheck.org, and liberals do love factcheck.org, don't they? And so they accept it without reservation, I suppose. Factcheck.org and Joe Miller of factcheck.org in January of 2009 wrote an article because at the time people were actually criticizing the amount of money being spent on Barack Obama's inauguration. And The fact checkers back in 2009 said that Barack Obama actually raised just about the same amount of money as George W. Bush did in 2004. So now the liberals are saying Barack Obama raised more money than anyone else ever had before him by far. Well, which is it? The fact checkers say it's not true. Fact checkers say that Rachel Maddow is wrong or just not telling you the truth. I'll continue.
You know what? It really was a big inauguration. And it did, in the end, cost about $50 million to put that on. And so they had to raise about $50 million to put that on. But let me say again, that was a really big, really unusually big inauguration. Let's just put that on the, can we put that up on the left side of the screen? All right. 2009, really big inauguration. Now, on the right side of your screen is an inauguration that was not nearly as big.
I need to stop the video here because I want to point out a couple of things that she's trying to do. First of all, she's trying to set the predicate that $53 million that Obama raised was way more money than anybody had ever raised, and it was for a really big inauguration. And she's not saying it outwardly. She's not actually saying it directly, but she's implying that the $53 million that's being spent is being spent on those people you see on the left side of the screen here. That's not true. That's not where that $53 million goes. The $53 million goes to things like inaugural balls, concerts, keeping government buildings open for tourists for later hours. And there's a lot of things that the $53 million pays for that have nothing to do with the crowd that shows up on Inauguration Day. The crowd that shows up on Inauguration Day, some of that money, some of that $53 million is spent for them. I mean, there are public events, there are private events, there are luncheons, there are concerts, celebrity appearances that the public gets to see. That's all paid for by private money. So the size of the crowd has really very little to do with the amount of money and what it's used for that's raised privately. Just wanted to point that out. The other thing I wanted to add too is that this picture that you're seeing here is the one that was published by the New York Times that I think a lot of people have, not just Trump, but a lot of people have questioned this picture because the picture that you see on the left, that's Washington, D.C. on the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated in 2009. And it was a massive crowd. Rachel Maddow's correct about that. But it was massive because Washington, D.C. is a Democrat city. It's a very black city, and it was the first black president. So it was a very large crowd. But what you see on the right, the reason why that crowd looks so small is because they want you to think that this picture on the right was taken around the same time of day that the picture on the left was taken. It wasn't. This picture on the right here has been said to have been taken a couple of hours prior to the actual inauguration itself. So the crowd was just beginning to fill in. So, I mean, obviously, this is not to say that the Trump crowd was anywhere near the size of the Obama crowd, but they use this for dramatic effect, this comparison, to try to further mislead you into thinking that this $53 million, boy, what did they, they needed 53 to spend on 1.5 million people that you see on the left side, but there's like 1/5 the size of the crowd on the right side, and they needed 107 million. That doesn't make sense. They're trying to create doubt in your mind as to what Donald Trump may have done with that money. So let's continue.
And I don't say that to be mean. Also, size isn't everything. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I'm not trying to shut down the Park Service, right? but the Trump inauguration, which is the picture on the right, just as a matter of fact, it was much, much smaller than the one we saw in 2009. And it was of a different character, right? There were no mega concerts. There were no internationally known celebrity performers flying in and having hundreds of thousands of people turn out to see them. I mean, the entertainment for the Trump inauguration was like, middle school bands and baton twirlers, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. A, size isn't everything, and B, I like baton twirlers. The Trump folks collected from donors $107 million to put on this inauguration. The one with the baton twirlers and the high school bands. And nobody at all lining whole big long stretches of the parade route during the inaugural parade.
I got to stop it here again. The people that are lining the route during the inaugural parade, that's not covered by the $107 million or the Obama $53 million. That comes from government money for crowd control and security. The government spends far more money on the inauguration day than any money that's privately raised. So she is conflating the crowd control money with the money that's used for other private and public events. She is misleading you.
I mean, if this is what your inauguration looks like, what do you need $100 million for? $107 million. What do you need? Why do you need to more than double the record amount of money that was raised and spent on the biggest inauguration ever for an inauguration that was a fraction of that size? Now, this is not a good government issue, at least in terms of taxpayer money. This is not taxpayer money, not public money that we're talking about. This is money that the Trump folks took from donors specifically for the inauguration. They took $107 million. And that $107 million that they took in from donors.
I want to stop it right here, even though she's in the middle of a sentence. And I want to bring your attention to this article in the Washington Post. And I urge you to Google it. Google this Washington Post article, because you're going to find some very interesting things in here after you hear what Rachel Maddow has to say, because there's a lot in this article that directly contradicts what she raises.
Regardless of what needed to be spent for the inauguration in the end, that $107 million, it went somewhere. I mean, it obviously didn't go to this, right?
She says, I'll give you the first example. She says that 107 had to go somewhere. Well, not necessarily all of it. I mean, obviously it was a smaller inauguration. There wasn't as many events, and there was a lot more money raised. True. But the Federal Election Commission gets a report as to what the disposition of the money is. Rachel Maddow's not even talking about that. She's not talking about the fact that the money must be accounted for to the FEC. Not only that, the article that she just showed you actually says that the Trump Inaugural Committee officials have stated on the record publicly that the money that is in excess is going to be donated to charities that have not been named yet, but will be named in the FEC filing once it is made. Why doesn't Rachel Maddow tell you that? You know why she doesn't want to tell you that? Because she wants $107 million to stick in your head. She wants you to think that that $107 million is sitting around and that was money given to Trump to do the same thing that Hillary Clinton did when she got paid off by people. She got paid off really paid off and changed public policy because of the money she got, namely the Russian uranium deal and a mere $250 million that went to the Clinton Family Foundation. She wants you to think, Rachel Maddow, that Donald Trump is up to the same shenanigans. In the meantime, she's showing you an article with a headline from the Washington Post, and in that article, it says exactly the opposite, that the money is being donated. We'll continue.
That $107 million was not given by donors to the inauguration. It was not needed for the inauguration. They could have gold-plated every person at that inauguration, and it still wouldn't have cost $107 million. But ask the next question, right? If that's not what donors' money went for, what did it go for? Because the donors didn't get their money back when it turned out to be kind of a cheap one. What were the donors donating to? What were they expecting to get for their money, given that it wasn't needed for the inauguration? Well, a couple of weeks ago, a reporter named Jake Horowitz posted a story at Mike.com about at least one thing that appears to have come out of that money. On February 8th, 2.5 weeks into the new administration, the White House hosted a meeting between several National Security Council officials and this guy. I think we've got a picture of him. Yeah. We now know, thanks to FEC filings released yesterday by the White House, that when this guy, this international investor, got that White House meeting with National Security Council officials on February 8th at the White House, we now know that his dad had just written over $600,000 in checks to fund the spectacularly overfunded inauguration. According to Jake Horowitz's reporting, the son got a meeting with National Security Council officials on February 8th.
This is a fake news alert. I want to show you this is what fake news is. What Rachel Maddow is now doing is trying to suggest that the money that went to the inauguration committee was a pay for play. That is fake news, and I'll explain why. Venezuela is in dire straits. Venezuela is a national security concern of the United States because Venezuela is an oil-producing country, and Venezuela is in the same hemisphere as the United States, and a lot of people could flood out of Venezuela and into the United States if Venezuela continues to descend into further chaos. So there's a national security interest for the United States to know what's going on in Venezuela. So it doesn't surprise me, at least, that a prominent business person from Venezuela is traveling to the United States and looking for a conversation with the National Security Council. Now, I will also add that if this were a pay to play, we would have seen some kind of change in U.S. policy, like lifting sanctions towards Venezuela. And maybe it's time to lift sanctions towards Venezuela. I don't know. But I will tell you this. Neither does Rachel Maddow, but she is trying to suggest she does know, and that's what's being discussed here. And surely this business person wants to see sanctions lifted from Venezuela because it helps his business, but doesn't mean that the $660,000, which they will never get back, was given for that purpose, and it doesn't mean that it was given to get a meeting for this purpose. But there is an interest for the United States to have a stable Venezuela. So why wouldn't the National Security Council take a meeting with a prominent business person from Venezuela? Why wouldn't they do that? This isn't somebody coming from Central Africa, in a country that doesn't mean anything to the United States in terms of geopolitical anything in terms of natural resources or anything else. I mean, this is an obviously necessary meeting at a particular level. This meeting happened in February. The conditions in Venezuela have been horrendous and are getting worse and have gotten worse since February. There's been no change to U.S. policy. So what the hell is Rachel Maddow implying here, other than just floating it out there, a fake news story?
Then the following day, on February 9th, he was actually ushered into an even higher level meeting, ushered into the top tier of the White House for a meeting personally with the president's top advisor, Steve Bannon. The purpose of those meetings, the National Security Council meeting and then the Steve Bannon meeting, the purpose of both of them was reportedly for him to present his detailed 10-point plan for changing U.S. foreign policy toward Venezuela, and specifically dropping U.S. sanctions toward that country. The guy reportedly put Venezuela's foreign minister on the phone with one of these National Security Council officials that he was meeting, put the foreign minister from Venezuela on the phone during the meeting, apparently just to show off that he could get the foreign minister on his cell phone meeting. Now, Venezuela doesn't get a ton of political coverage in the United States, but Venezuela is a country in intense turmoil right now. The sanctions that the U.S. put on Venezuela were put there in 2014 after 43 people got killed while participating in anti-government protests. Another 3 people got killed in anti-government protests just yesterday. There have been weeks and weeks and weeks of rioting and violent protests. And now today, Venezuelans are enraged anew by this brand new FEC filing from the White House.
That is false. She has no way to know that. She has no possible way of knowing that. She is correct about what's going on in Venezuela and how people are rioting. They don't have jobs. Their money is worthless. There's no food. There's no medicine. She is correct about that. That's because they have a kleptocracy of socialists who are stealing the resources of the country. And, Rachel Maddow is something of a socialist herself. So why would she ever criticize that? You see, here's the problem. The problem is she wants to lay this, what you're looking at here with these crowds and tear gas and all that, she wants to lay that on Trump getting money from the Venezuelans. It's nothing to do with that. What the problem with Venezuela, like I said, is a kleptocracy. The daughter of the dead president, Chavez, is the richest woman in the country. She has $4 billion in the bank, and she still lives in the presidential palace. The current president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, does not live in the presidential palace. The daughter of the former president lives there. That's the kind of country Venezuela is right now. So, but Rachel Maddow just blows right past those facts because she wants you to believe that $1 million of the $107 million, and who knows how much more, is paid to Donald Trump, because he's in league with these criminals who run countries like Venezuela. It's fake news.
Which shows that interesting thing about the guy who got the meeting with the NSC officials and with Steve Bannon. It also shows that while Venezuelans have been rioting in the streets, while there have been acute food shortages and medicine shortages in Venezuela, this is a country that should be a rich country, but people have literally been starving in Venezuela. Somehow in the midst of this incredible economic and political crisis in Venezuela, Venezuela's state-run oil company somewhere found $500,000 to donate to the very, very, very inexplicably overfunded Trump inauguration.
Well, maybe people in Venezuela wouldn't be starving. Maybe they wouldn't be eating flamingos and anteaters if they weren't a socialist utopia. See, that's the problem with Venezuela. The problem with Venezuela isn't Donald Trump. It isn't Citgo. It isn't this guy who had his father give $666,000 to the Trump inauguration. The problem with Venezuela is that it's run by people who think like Rachel Maddow.
Venezuela's state-run oil company gave him $500,000 too. So Venezuela's state-run oil company is dumping money into the Trump inauguration, $500,000. Meanwhile, another $500,000 plus was apparently enough to open up not just the White House, but the National Security Council, the freaking National Security Council, to a very well-connected donor and international investor who had a plan that he wanted to share on Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is in dire straits. It does not have the money to spare, and yet they inexplicably dumped $500,000 on Trump.
It doesn't have the money to spare. I just finished telling you that the daughter of the former president has $4 billion in the bank, and they have an international oil company called Citgo. Of course they've got money. It's a kleptocracy. This is what I'm talking about. The people who run the country are stealing the wealth of the country at the expense of all these people that you see rioting. The country's falling apart because it's socialist. That's the truth. That's not the truth you're going to get from Rachel Maddow, because Rachel Maddow is a propagandist, lying, socialist radical.